As is customary, I would like to begin by reminding you of the purpose of these quarterly economic estimates provided by the PIOJ. The PIOJ presents preliminary estimates on economic performance for each quarter based on early information available from the major data providers. This release of the preliminary estimate is consistent with trends in all economies globally, where it is the common practice to release a first, second, and even a third preliminary estimate before the final official figures are released. In the case of Jamaica, the PIOJ strives to release the preliminary growth estimate approximately 6 weeks following the end of the quarter being reviewed, whereas STATIN releases the official GDP figures 12 weeks following the end of the quarter. The release of the preliminary outturn information is used by various stakeholders, including our international development partners, the private sector, and the government to inform critical planning and policy-related decisions. STATIN's data on GDP represents the official data on economic performance. Therefore, all preliminary estimates previously provided are updated to reflect the data provided by STATIN. So for example, for the preliminary estimate presented today, the actual data will be released by STATIN at the end of September 2020, at which time the estimates being provided today will be updated. Note that today's presentation is occurring at a later time than is the norm and is explained by challenges in obtaining data due to the containment measures associated with managing the spread of the COVID-19 disease, inclusive of physical distancing and work from home orders. Note also that the gaps between our initial estimates and the subsequent estimates are usually large in extraordinary shocks, for example, COVID-19 pandemic. So for example, the PIOJ estimated that during the January to March 2020 quarter, the economy contracted by 1.7%. However, the subsequent estimate from STATIN, which benefited from increased data, showed a contraction of 2.3%, a variation of 0.6 percentage point from PIOJ's initial estimate. This variation was outside the usual difference between PIOJ's estimate and STATIN's subsequent estimate. Today, we are reporting that real gross domestic product, GDP, for the Jamaican economy contracted by an estimated 18% in the April to June 2020 quarter, compared with the corresponding quarter of 2019. The outturn for the April to June 2020 period largely reflected the impact of 1. The implementation of measures to manage the COVID-19 pandemic commencing in mid-March, which included the closure of international borders to passenger movements, which curtailed external demand and essentially halted all tourist-related activities, implementation of curfews, which restricted people movement, opening hours of businesses, and adversely impacted the demand for goods and services, implementation of physical distancing, which restricted congregation of persons in one location and thus negatively impacted recreational, entertainment, and restaurant activities, closure of all schools, and the implementation of general stay-at-home and work-from-home orders, which further dampened the demand for goods and services. 2. Lower capacity utilization within the mining and quarrying industry, following the temporary closure of Jamaica's largest alumina refinery in September 2019 to upgrade productive capacity. 3. A continued slowdown in construction-related activities consequent on the ending of major road infrastructure projects, the slow startup of new projects, as well as a downturn in building construction activities. And 4. Weakened business and consumer confidence associated with uncertainties regarding the duration and impact of the pandemic. And 5. Weakened demand associated with lower income due to job losses and reduced work hours. Globally, similar negative outturns were recorded for many countries as a result of the impact of COVID-19 and the measures implemented to curtail the spread of the virus. An examination of the economic performance in some of Jamaica's trading partners revealed that the economies of the USA, Canada, and the United Kingdom recorded contractions of 9.6%, 13%, and 21.7% respectively during the review quarter compared with the similar quarter of 2019. Real sector developments. Developments in the goods producing industry. The goods producing industry contracted by an estimated 7%, with all industries registering a decline. This performance largely reflected the impact of the temporary closure of the Gisco Alpart alumina refinery, drought conditions which adversely affected agriculture production, and measures implemented to contain the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. Agriculture. Output of the agriculture, forestry, and fishing industry was estimated to have declined by 8.5%. The outturn of the industry largely reflected the impact of drought conditions experienced across the island. The group Other Agricultural Crops recorded a 6.8% decline due to lower output in 7 of the 9 crop groups, including legumes down 18.3%, yams down 13.4%, and vegetables down 13.2%. A lower level of output was also recorded for traditional export crops, which declined by 11.9%. This reflected declines in all 4 export crop groups, namely sugarcane down 20.3%, banana down 6.9%, coffee down 40.9%, and cocoa down 43.7%. Sugarcane production was impacted by the non-operation of a major sugar factory and the logistical challenges faced by farmers to transport the cane to other factories. Coffee and cocoa production was negatively impacted by the closure of the hotel industry, as the marketing of these products to hotels, inbound shops, and other tourism outlets was curtailed due to the COVID-19 containment measures. Mining and quarrying. Real value added for the mining and quarrying industry contracted by an estimated 25.2%. This was due to lower alumina production, which outweighed an increase in crude bauxite production. Alumina production declined by 29.8%, stemming from a reduction in capacity utilization associated with the closure of the Alpart plant. The alumina capacity utilization rate declined by 20.1 percentage points to 47.7%. Crude bauxite production increased by 18.1% due to higher demand from third-party customers. The average bauxite capacity utilization rate increased to 68.2% from 57.8%. Manufacturing. Real value added for the manufacturing industry is estimated to have contracted by 2.9%, reflecting a downturn in both the food, beverages, and tobacco and other manufacturing components. With respect to food, beverages, and tobacco, lower levels of output were recorded for animal feed, down 17.4%, poultry meat, down 16.5%, dairy products, down 12.9%, and edible fats, down 11.1%. In the other manufacturing category, lower output stemmed from an estimated decline in both the chemical and chemical products and petroleum products categories. Lower petroleum production was recorded for gasoline, down 17.8%, LPG, down 10.9%, turbo fuel, down 66%, and fuel oil, down 70%. Construction. Real value added for the construction industry declined by an estimated 3%, reflecting lower activity in both the building construction and other construction components. The contraction in the building construction component was due to lower residential and non-residential construction activities, reflecting housing starts by the NHT down 65% to 350 units, and an estimated downturn in non-residential building activities, including hotel and commercial building construction. The estimated contraction in the other construction component was due to reduced capital expenditure on civil engineering activities, reflecting National Works Agency, which disbursed $2.7 billion on construction and rehabilitation of roads, relative to $3.6 billion in the corresponding quarter of 2019, and Jamaica Public Service, which disbursed $1.8 billion relative to $2.5 billion in the corresponding quarter of 2019. Developments in the services industry. The services industry was estimated to have declined by 20.6%, reflecting a fall in real value added in all industries, with the exception of producers of government services, which remained flat. Electricity and water supply. Electricity and water supply recorded estimated contraction of 8.8% in real value added due to reduced electricity and water consumption. Electricity consumption decreased by 10.1%, reflecting lower levels of consumption in 5 of the 6 categories. General service, small businesses using less than 25 kilovolt ampere, kVA, down 15.7%. Power service, that's large businesses using more than 25 kVA but less than 500 kVA, was down 12.7%. Large power, that's businesses using more than 500 kVA, was down 21.8%. And largest power, a single location with peak demand of 2,000 kVA, was down 35.2%. And street lighting and other was down 39.1%. These outweighed an estimated 7.9% increase in residential consumption. Water consumption declined by 3.5% due to a fall-off in the Western Division of 13.8%, which outweighed an increase in the Eastern Division of 2.3%. Transport, storage, and communication. Real value added for the transport, storage, and communication industry contracted by an estimated 29.6%. This resulted from a decrease in the transport and storage component, driven by a contraction in the air transport subcomponent, largely reflecting decreased passenger movements, down 97.7%, due to departures, down 97.3%, and arrivals, down 98%, as well as an estimated decline in the maritime transport subcomponent. Finance and insurance services. Real value added for the finance and insurance services industry was estimated to have declined by 3% during the review quarter, reflecting the impact of measures implemented to limit the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic on economic activities and return on investment. Real value added in the wholesale and retail trade, repair and installation of machinery, WR trim industry, is estimated to have contracted by 20%, reflecting the combined impact of an estimated contraction in associated industries such as agriculture, manufacturing, and construction, and measures associated with the management of the COVID-19 pandemic, which reduced operational hours and restricted the movement of people. Reduced sales were recorded for 7 of the 8 categories, with the largest declines recorded in textiles, clothing, shoes, and jewelry, down 44.7%, minerals, fuels, and lubricants, down 39.9%, motor vehicles, auto repairs, and accessories, down 33%. Hotels and restaurants. Real value added for the hotels and restaurants industry contracted by an estimated 87.5%, reflecting a sharp decline in visitor arrivals and the number of persons utilizing restaurant services. Among the measures implemented to manage the spread of the COVID-19 was the closure of borders to passenger traffic for 2 of the 3 months during the quarter. This led to a significant fall-off in stopover arrivals by 98.9% to 7,188 visitors. Total visitor expenditure at US $16.2 million was 98.1% lower than that recorded in the corresponding period of 2019. Restaurant services were also negatively impacted by measures implemented to stop the gathering of persons as well as the curfew implemented, which led to a reduction in operation hours. Employment update. For the month of April, the Statistical Institute of Jamaica, STATIN, was unable to undertake the labor force survey due to restrictions implemented to manage the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. To be more specific, physical distancing orders prevented the conduct of face-to-face interviews by STATIN's field officers. Additionally, quarantine orders for St. Catherine hindered the movement of field officers. GDP performance for January to June 2020. For the first 6 months of 2020, real GDP is estimated to have declined by 10.2%. The goods producing industry is estimated to have contracted by 4.4%, while the services industry contracted by 11.5%. The industries which were estimated to have recorded the largest decline during the first half of the year were hotels and restaurants, down 50%, mining and quarrying, down 30.5%, and other services, down 23.1%. For the short-term economic outlook, July to September 2020 and fiscal year 2020-2021. For July to September 2020, a decline in output within the range of 8 to 10% is anticipated. This projection is based on expected contraction in all industries, with the exception of the producers of government services. The economy will continue to be impacted by measures implemented to manage the spread of COVID-19, largely reflected in downturns for hotels and restaurants, reflecting a sharp downturn in foreign national arrivals. Preliminary data indicate that stopover arrivals decreased by 84.5% for the month of July. There were no cruise passenger arrivals during July. 2, other services, reflecting the implementation of the disaster risk management enforcement measures, which restricts the opening of bars, nightclubs, public beaches, and other areas of entertainment and attraction. 3, mining and quarrying, reflecting a downturn in alumina production due to lower capacity utilization, particularly as a result of the closure of the Alpart refinery. For the month of July, alumina production decreased by 27.3% and crude bauxite production fell by 5.9%. 4, electricity and water, reflecting a reduction in the consumption of electricity and water. For the month of July, electricity consumption fell by 9.4% and water consumption declined by 0.5%. It is anticipated that all quarters of fiscal year 2020 to 2021 will record a contraction in output. Consequently, the PIOJ's projection for output is for a contraction within the range of 8% to 10% for the full fiscal year. Growth in output is expected to resume during fiscal year 2021 to 2022, given the cycling out of the impact of the closure of the Alpart refinery, as well as an expected reduction in the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on economic activities. However, GDP levels are not anticipated to recover until 2 years after the pandemic. Upside potential and downside risks. There are upside potential and downside risks to these forecasts. The main downside risks to the forecast presented include plant downtime in the industrial sectors, adverse weather conditions, particularly for agriculture, lower than anticipated global growth, especially in the economies of Jamaica's main trading partners, a spike in the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic locally, which triggers the implementation of more restrictive measures. The pace of economic growth could be enhanced if the following upside potential are realized. Stronger than anticipated recovery in global economic conditions, resulting in higher external demand, which augurs well for key export industries, and effective management of the spread of the pandemic, resulting in faster recovery of economic activities locally. In closing, the preliminary data presented on performance for the April to June 2020 quarter indicate that the economy has continued to be negatively impacted by the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and measures implemented to mitigate its spread. The most significant restrictions occurred within the review quarter, including the closure of Jamaica's borders to incoming passengers for over 2 of the 3 months, and the implementation of work from home and other physical distancing measures. For the upcoming quarter, July to September 2020, it is projected that the economy will continue to contract within a range of 8 to 10%. The lower rate of contraction is due to the lifting or relaxation of some of the restrictions previously implemented. The borders have been reopened to passenger movements to facilitate the resumption of activities in the hotels and restaurants industry. The entertainment industry was reopened on a limited scale. Curfew hours have been reduced to facilitate longer operating hours for businesses, and physical distancing measures for public transportation and business places were eased. Additionally, the hosting of a general election and the associated increased expenditure by the main political parties, though relatively subdued, will provide a fillip to the performance of key industries such as the wholesale and retail trading industry, WR-TRIM. All these developments are expected to temper the rate of contraction in economic activities during the July to September period. Given current developments with a spike in the rate of infection from COVID-19, the expectation is that measures to limit its spread will be in place during the short term. As a consequence of this assessment, it is unlikely that the economy will record growth for the remainder of this fiscal year. The current projection is that the economy will contract within the range of 8% to 10% for fiscal year 2020 to 2021. This compares with the previous projection for a contraction within the range of 4% to 6%. This outturn, if materialized, will result in the most significant decline in GDP on record. That is, since fiscal year 1996 to 97, when Jamaica began producing the fiscal year GDP data series. Although the current growth prospects are daunting, it is imperative that businesses and the country in general use this downtime effectively to seek out opportunities which have emerged as a result of the pandemic, as well as implement productivity-enhancing measures to place businesses in a position to capitalize on the rebound after the pandemic. Finally, I want to recognize a very dedicated and hardworking team at the PIOJ, and I want to encourage you all to maintain the discipline in protecting yourselves and your families by abiding by the protocols implemented to mitigate the spread of the virus. I also remind us all to continue our collaboration as we sustain our efforts to make Jamaica the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. God bless you all.